How is this for a brag? I recently finished Sekiro Shadows Die Twice for the very first time. It took me almost 45 hours, it was as difficult as it was inspiring. I absolutely loved every second of my playtime with it. Being a FromSoftware title, there were many expectations for it, and even if I knew that Sekiro strays away from the classic Soulsborne formula quite a bit, I was surprised by how distant it felt and, at the same time, how quintessential FromSoftware it is. There's much less emphasis on sprawling and labyrinthian level design, focusing on a much more linear adventure, but the satisfaction of roaming around and exploring every nook and cranny of the game world is still there. The spectrum of the customization options is much narrower. The swath of spells, weapon arts, and items have been significantly reduced, and pretty much every actual weapon has been scrapped except for the katana Kusabimaru Kuru gives the protagonist at the beginning of the game. Also, a real, named, and broadly characterized protagonist. That's different. Ignoring the more streamlined and classical storytelling structure that Sekiro Shadows Die Twice features for a second, the key area of difference from the rest of FromSoftware catalog is the difficulty of the moment-to-moment combat encounters. Sekiro is harder for FromSoft veterans because the combat flow poses significant differences from other titles, so much so that it feels like you're learning a system all over again. Your main tool for avoiding damage is the parry button, not the dodge button, and because the animation for parry is much less cumbersome than the dodge one, FromSoft figured that they can bombard you with attacks at a pace that, at the time, had no precedent in FromSoftware's esteemed filmography. You can't rely on your very Soulsborne trained muscle memory. Sekiro is built different. For this reason, if this game is hard for Soulsborne aficionados, I can't imagine how hard it is for someone that never played any of these games. So, Sekiro is very hard. Fine, but can we qualify my brag a little better? I mean, sure, it might not be a humanity level brag. It's a video game after all. I didn't find a cure for cancer or make $1 million or find the will to get out of bed at a reasonable time for boomer standards, so it's not that strong of a brag. How about a video game brag? Well, within video game spaces there's a small but brilliant subculture of speedrunners that can finish Sekiro in less than 20 minutes. Hell, at VGC a couple years ago there was a guy that was getting Sekiro done blindfolded. In the end, it's not even a brag. After all, it's just a video game. I don't want to diminish the achievement itself because, again, it's a very hard video game. Those nerds that do it blindfolded are bona fide legends. And I'm definitely not here to mock you or punch you down if you genuinely finished it and had a really rough time doing it. Speaking exclusively for myself, I just got good, as the former kids keep saying over and over and over, as if gatekeeping was still a sexy way to behave on the internet. Perhaps for those of us who've been gaming under a rock, Git Good is an internet slang, very popular among players with even minimal familiarity with Soulsborne's titles, in particular, voluntarily miswritten as such, meaning get good, as in just get better and stop wasting our time, which has been a terribly reductive and condescending way of responding to any requests for help, or to criticism towards FromSoftware games' difficulty. Since the time the internet started to host communities around FromSoftware's production, a calm and collected and not at all unhinged discussion has taken place between the Git Gooders, who seem to revel in the fact that these games are so hard some gamers can't seem to complete them, and the Easy Modders, a more nebulous coalition whose lowest common denominator opinion is just that FromSoftware's titles should have a more forgiving, less demanding game mode. And around them, countless minutes worth of articles, YouTube videos, and podcasts has been made declaring truth, allegiance, mockery, slander, or a combination of each towards either side of the conversation, the creator themselves, sometimes directly towards FromSoftware game director Hidetaka Miyazaki, so I understand I'm far from pioneering anything in this field. What I want to do is take both points of view as valid and entertain them, see where they can lead me. I think this is as good a time as any to lay down on the table my personal experience with FromSoft's production. I am very new to Souls-like in general. They escaped me for the better part of my life, so much so that The very first one I ever played was the latest release, Elden Ring. After that I played the Suicidal one, the Italian one, which I know it's not strictly a FromSoftware game, but I love the game enough to warrant a mention here. And right after that I decided to embark on the journey to complete the one that is by most considered the hardest. When I spoke to my brother about the fact that I started Sekiro, and note that when I say spoke, I actually mean that I approached him like a religious zealot wielding my brand new Kusabimaru replica, declaring, "Brother, you need to play Sekiro, you owe it to yourself to play it, it's that good." His answer was something along the lines of, "Why do you hate yourself this much?" And yes, he was obviously exaggerating for the sake of the joke, but the joke is rooted in the fact that Sekiro's difficulty's reputation, either the true reflection of the game or the grandiose and majestic ideal of it sermonized by Miyazaki's faithfuls, precedes it. So all this to admit that I'm not as much of a nerd as Vatividya is, even if my nerd powers are rising as of recently. I'm not a FromSoftware veteran, and I'm not a godlike master of the mechanics of these games. As I already said, I'm just a guy who got good. But what defines these games? How are they built? Anthropy, in her book Rise of the Videogame Zinesters, defines games as an experience created by rules. In it she acknowledges that the definition is quite broad, arguing it is so for the sake of inclusion. The rules are, obviously, set by the developers during the development process. The experience is the artistic creation produced by the rules. I want to mention that in most definitions of games, a sense of narrative and storytelling is lost. And to be fair, it's not needed to define a game. There are many games, even if we just remain in the realm of video games, that don't feature much, if at all, in terms of narrative trust, but are still unequivocally games. I want to mention these asterisks next to the definition because I feel like a big part of the value of games is taken from their narrative potential. It is why we talk about writing and pacing and ludonarrative dissonance. The rules that comprise FromSoftware's design philosophy for the majority of its games, and most of the games that directly take inspiration from them, like Lies of Pi, are intricate level and world design, relying on a checkpoint system to which you can usually, but not always, teleport from any other checkpoint, making the journey forward perilous until you find a checkpoint that you can use to go back to the central hub and cash in the currencies you gather killing monsters, converting it into permanent upgrades for your character. Punishing death mechanics. Each time you die, you get thrown back to the last checkpoint you visited, and you either lose some currency outright, or the game drops it near the point you died, allowing you to recover it. If you die before recovering a pool of currencies, it is lost forever, replaced by another pool left where you just died. Whenever you spawn from a checkpoint, almost all non-boss enemies respawn, be it because of a teleport or a death. Because of this, each time you die, the game is demanding you to approach the encounters that killed you better than you did the last time, trusting you to act on your newly acquired knowledge. Mildly complex character customization options, often tied to an intricate loot system of weapons and spells and abilities that directly feed back to the level and world design that rewards exploration with more customization options available. These customization options, with some notably busted exceptions, are never enough to completely trivialize an entire playthrough. The game is balanced in a way that some options are going to feel stronger in some places and worse in others. For example, I have fond memories of relentlessly bullying Malenia, Blade of Mikela, who has known me with a Dex Faith build centered around infusing my Nagakiba with Bloodflame Blade. This specific build had a ton more difficulty beating the last boss of the game, as it is immune to bleed. The game is indeed asking you to adapt to each situation. Maybe keep a different Dex weapon in your back pocket, or go back to the Turtle Pope and learn a couple of those busted lightning miracles. Adrenalinic moment-to-moment combat that rewards a calm and collected approach through a combination of trial and error, good reflexes, and ultimately, patience. Your healing reserves refills every time you interact with a checkpoint, so they end up acting as a buffer on how many mistakes you can make, and it will happen that you run out of them before reaching the next checkpoint. This is emphasized during boss fights that often have a checkpoint right before the boss room, so you can enter the fight with your resources ready. This is not always the case, and I feel I'm underestimating how tough their boss runbacks are in the older ranches of the series, but I never played them, so I can't really tell. And in the latest games, I almost found the opposite problem, like everybody knows how Dark Souls 3 has a handful of completely redundant bonfires, but I digress. There are other minor features like asynchronous multiplayer in the form of messages that you can leave on the ground and will appear in other players' world. A form of more usual multiplayer like using summon signs to offer help to other players or invasion signs to invade other players' world with the intent to kill them. Consumable items that brings a variety of buffs and skill possibilities, and last but not least, a weirdly enigmatic form of storytelling expressed through NPCs that deliver puzzling dialogue about their intentions and values. They are meant to be chased around the game, to be found in the most improbable of places, their quests often ending with a powerful item as a reward, and the NPCs' very non-heroic and somewhat avoidable death. This is, to put it bluntly, pretty radical no matter where you stand on the easy mode debate. Looking at them from the top down, these rules speak of a pretty demanding game, considering how different they feel from the rest of the general gaming landscape. These games are very prone to put you to the test, sometimes with some very dirty traps or enemy positioning. When you make a mistake, they punish you, and if you fail too many times in a close time frame, the game ships you back to the closest checkpoint, respawns every enemy you just went through, puts you back to 0 souls, and asks you to do better. Other games in my experience handle difficulty less gracefully because it's not really baked into the design of the game. Shooters in particular tend to handle this very bluntly by just increasing HP and damage of your enemies, which I think it works fine sometimes, but I don't think it's necessarily an interesting choice. So, we have the rules. What do we do with this? Who is really going to enjoy going through this? To sum it all up, yes, the games are hard. All I've described plays exactly as you would imagine. Each game is a constant loop of starting from point A, going through a labyrinthian gauntlet of enemies and traps and elevators and oddly placed loot, until you do it well enough that you reach point B, as in another checkpoint. You rest, you recuperate, possibly you empower yourself, and point B just becomes another point A, over and over again until you read Inheritor of John Dark Souls Liquidated or something. Past the difficulty, there's a varying degree of existentialism and hopefulness in pretty much all titles. Most of FromSoftware's production features worlds that are heavily post-apocalyptic. Whatever cataclysm happened, it was so long ago that the status quo of its inhabitants is either a hopeful misery or a hopeless dominion over the former. This is a broad description and it's going to be very easy to poke holes in it using many examples like Alexander or Solaire or the entirety of Sekiro, but it's undeniable that the vibe is generally either gloomy, dark or depressed, but always hopeful. I think this ties very beautifully to the rules I described. The game is, by all intents and purposes, an absolute bastard. It keeps you on your toes at all times. It definitely toys with the camera, hiding traps, often right behind the corner or even in plain sight, but in the end never puts a death counter in front of you and mocks you for it. It throws you back to point A, allowing you to learn from the mistakes you made the previous run, and gives you infinite tries to do it correctly. It's punishing, but only in the context of each point A to point B journey. I have no data to support this, but I feel most Souls-like veterans would agree that after some time, you grow completely numb of losing untold amounts of runes to extremely silly and stupid mistakes, because that's not the point. It's never over in Dark Souls. We could both play Elden Ring and reach the end with wildly different character levels. I think Alexander in particular is the most refined personification of these themes. He comes from Jarburg, an isolated community of jar people that hide from strangers, dance in the grass and cultivate rare species of flowers. Talk about life goals. Alexander is not living in Jarburg because he left to become an adventurer. You meet him in the first area as he cries for help because he's stuck in the ground, and invites you to meet him at Redmane Castle to participate in a combat festival. You find him again along your journeys, sometimes in a safe spot, in a cave, sometimes in a pool of magma, sometimes stuck in the ground again. He puts himself to the test during the festival, where he joins you in the fight against General Radahn, one of the Shardbearers, demigod son of Renala and Radagon, and one of the mightiest warriors in the lands between. After the fight, he compliments you on defeating the Starscourge general, but he's also very hard on himself.
It was a battle marvelously fought. You are well and truly a champion, friend. I, on the other hand, am nothing but a crock. One hit was all it took to crack me, and for my insides to come spilling out. After that, I hid like a coward.
Alexander was made to be a warrior vessel. Inside him, he puts the flesh of fallen warriors to better himself.
But don't you think I've given up just yet. As luck would have it, there's a veritable mountain of warriors' bodies right here. If I can just squeeze this bunch down inside me, I'll be a mighty warrior again in no time.
The thematic role of Alexander is to be an equal, another warrior on the journey for greatness, a much more trusted and pleasant ally than many tarnished brothers you find along the way. In the end, he reaches crumbling Farum Azula, one of the hardest places to reach in the game, and after gazing at the shattered skyline, he challenges you to a duel with the specific purpose of defeating you and absorbing your flesh too, as you are, as he says after you ultimately defeat him, the stuff of champions. Alexander is very aware of the dramatic situation in the lands between, and is aware that his quest for greatness is not easy. He's alone, and most of the time he needs you to get out of sticky situation. But he never quits, and in the end, he challenges you to an honorable duel, displaying some unique techniques he learned during his journey, and leaves you with arguably the absolute best trinket in the game. Alexander is indeed a great example of this sense of open determination, but he's not alone. These themes are very easy to see explored all over this world, and it's a big part of the fulfillment you'll get from playing specifically FromSoftware's catalog. These are not just good games, these are great games that understand the sense of purpose you get when interacting with a fundamentally interactive medium. And to be sure of this, one just needs to listen to Mr. Miyazaki himself, each and every time journalists ask him about it. In an interview with The New Yorker in 2021, he commented on the difficulty as such, quote, "I do feel apologetic towards anyone who feels there's just too much to overcome in my games. I just want as many players as possible to experience the joy that comes from overcoming hardships. We are always looking to improve, but in our games specifically, hardship is what gives meaning to the experience. So it's not something we're willing to abandon at the moment. It's our identity." End quote. This thematic cohesion and sense of forward momentum are a powerful and unique feature of these games. And if you need proof, by all means, just pause the video, open another YouTube tab and search for Dark Souls Saved Me and hear testimonies of other folk of how the simple act of playing a video game helped them rebuild their life from pretty deep pits of sadness and depression. You don't really get that from Ubisoft open worlds. And now I'm going to argue for an easy mode by using the words of a French pedagogue. Yes, even the French can see we need an easy mode in here. Daniel Pennac is a French writer who wrote Comme Roman in 1992, a collection of essays in which he explores a philosophical approach to reading and posits the 10 rights of the reader, a sort of manifesto on how to approach the pleasure of reading. Among them, my favorites are by far the right of Bovaryism, which allows me to look at Orbeck and say, he's just like me, for real, and the right not to read, which allows me to talk about Pennac's book without having read it. The purpose of these essays is to argue a refreshingly spontaneous form of discovery or rediscovery of the book. Not through an arbitrary and dogmatic sense of duty towards reading, but through an organic and spontaneous process of exploration and enjoyment. Reading not because you must, because it's what good people do or because it's morally correct, but because you first discovered the love for reading and then you chase that infatuation by actively seeking new reading experience one after another. He argues that for us all to approach the pleasure of reading, we need concessions, not limitations. We need to give people a bill of rights. So, in the spirit of concessions, I want to mention the one that it clearly states in the book but doesn't outright mention in the bill. The right to do whatever the hell you want with your book. As much as Pennac and every writer gets a raging itch through their spine when they see someone folding a page to keep track of where you last stopped reading, you can't do much about it. It's my book. I can do whatever I want with it. To upscale the raging itch to murderous impulse would require something more abusive to be done to said book. For example, something like writing all over it, or even ripping pages out of it. It would be understandable, but again, my book, my pages. While it is undeniable that these were essays written in response to a growing sentiment of lack of love of reading in the public, written especially from a pedagogical and academical point of view, it's not super hard to abstract this text to a more generic, the rights of the art user, be said user a reader, a listener, a jar from Jarburg, or a video game player. After all, if you think that Life is Strange is garbage and someone claims that Max is just like me and I love her, it's 100% a valid interpretation and their way to see themselves in a game is perfectly legit. If you see a friend that cannot, for the life of themselves, stop playing any and every real-time strategy that gets released on Steam and literally nothing else like it's 2010, it's their playtime. They can do whatever they want with it. So hypothetically, if there was a way to scribble all over a video game and change anything and everything about it, I think we have a definitive right to argue that it should be possible, right? What do we care after all how people play their games? What do we, as a community, lose or gain by imposing a specific vision for an experience that we don't even have ownership over the authorship of? I admit, it took me some time to adjust to this point of view because, of course, I bought in. I got good, and most of all, I realized the value in getting good, the magic of the process and the beauty in getting past the challenges. But this does not change the fact that the possibility of toying with the game like it's a Lego set would be a more than nice thing to have. And you don't need to read Pennac to realize it either. It's not like Anthropy is against the concept of the easy mode only because I used her to argue for playing games as they are. Actually, by reading her book, I would think that just based on her very broad inclusion argument, she wouldn't mind an easy mode in her FromSoftware title. And it's not like an explicit easy mode has never existed in any video game. The Witcher 3 has a very explicit just the story mode. Pillars of Eternity 2 has very detailed and customizable difficulty settings, and Soma developers introduced the safe mode years after the game's release, and it had been available as a mod way before that. For those who are interested in playing FromSoftware titles and have been scared before by the harshness of the difficulty, let this be a signal in support of using mods to scribble all over your Dark Souls and Elden Ring. To be honest, I would tell a Soulsborne veteran to use mods to ease their playthroughs once you're just doing them for the comfort of replaying those games. My third or fourth playthrough of Elden Ring was a pure strength run, and I challenged myself to use as many weapons as I could that fit into my pure strength idea. I also, foolishly if I may, decided to keep them all max level, just in case I found a boss that I wanted to use a specific weapon against, and I had to farm souls so I could buy smithing stones to upgrade my weapon over and over again. I'm pretty sure a good 30% of that playthrough is just farming, while on Nexus mods, user Key Gerstrike here is having a grand time actually reading Daniel Pennac, while I murdered Banished Knights for 3k souls a pop, because you know, that's what the experience demanded of me. Now of course I don't think my first playthrough of Elden Ring would have been better with the complete removal of smithing stones, but maybe someone else's playthrough might be possible with it. By the way, I don't really like the argument that these games already have an easy mode, because summons or farming or whatever way to cheese bosses you might conjure, because I find them both made in bad faith and wrong. The game isn't offering an easy mode with summons, the game is offering these rules to you. Never, either in the text or the accompanying tutorial messages, the game declares summons or grinding or sleep pots for the Godskin duo as sin. That clearly splits the player base between real and fake gamers. The players are inferring these values independently. And also, the argument assumes that everyone is okay accepting both the hard difficulty and the quote-unquote easy mode the game already has baked in, and using this thesis in the conversation with people that want a clear-cut, explicit easy mode is, in my opinion, a bit dishonest. What you're saying is that the rules of the experience are easier than they look. What the easy modders are saying is that they simply don't like the rules. In the end, all of my waxing about themes and cohesion and significance is a bit superfluous. It's okay not to have this worm in your head that wants to read this kind of stuff in game. In the end, they are experiences created by rules. Nothing here points to a necessity to really think too much about the stuff you play. Your experience can be as surface level as you want, as long as you enjoy going through it. If Anna posits that games are, indeed, experiences created by rules, Pennac can help us drive a +18 heavy claymore into the rules and twist them, until they produce an experience whose shape we enjoy. But then, we're not going through the same experience. I have been both very explicit and mildly unapologetic about how much I love the Soulsborne games so far, and I'm going to tell you now how much I love them. As I mentioned before, I came into these games quite late. When I was younger, I used to look at Dark Souls from afar, but I also had caught wind of the reputation of it, how hard and punishing and unfair it was, and ended up steering right clear of that. One could find this peculiar, but I'm 99% sure I'm not alone in this experience. The only reason why I got into Soulsborne was actually because I almost got bullied to play them by another terrifying presence in my life, my beautiful artsy gamer girlfriend. She caught the FromSoft bug way before I did, and her passion for the themes and their execution I spoke of had her extremely hyped for Elden Ring. I didn't care until 2 weeks before release. I casually said to her that I was thinking about playing it. I bought it on day 1 and pretty much never stopped playing it for close to 6 months. And during these 6 months, we spoke for hours about stuff that we found, making wildly wrong hypotheses about the cryptic lore, helping each other with dungeons, going through a game that by the end had consumed 180 hours just on my first playthrough. And I skipped Millennia because I was too chicken for it. You could say that you can get this from any game, and that would be strictly true. My argument is instead tied to the toughness of the gameplay itself. If you finish Baldur's Gate 3, we can talk about it. You can tell me who's your crush, what you think about the adaptation of the D&D rules to the virtual tabletop space, how you felt about the narrative pacing. But the same conversation gets, at least in my experience, a slightly different tone when we're talking about Honor mode in Baldur's Gate 3. The added difficulty adds a level of achievement that is almost akin to climbing a mountain. When you climb a mountain, and I then climb the same mountain, we can talk about how it went. I only recently finished Sekiro, and now that you did, I want to know how you felt by the end, because the end for me was pretty electric. When I finished Sekiro for the first time the other night, I almost cried. After 1 hour of attempts, on top of I think a couple more hours of death screens before dinner, I managed to finally defeat Kensei Ishinashina. When I did, I was so elated I was on the verge of tears. Going through the game for the first time has been an incredible experience that I will forever cherish, and all I want is for other people to go through the same thing, so I can finally ask them, how was it going through it? How did you feel at the end? Was it worth the time and the sweat? I want to emphasize, this difference I'm talking about is rather slim, as much as I'm waxing poetic about it, but I find these games too fascinating to waste the opportunity to preach about their ludonarrative brilliance. If it isn't clear, my ultimate argument is mostly communal. If you hack your game to be invincible and stroll your way from the high wall of Lothric straight to the end, we didn't really play the same game. I still hold your experience as valid, it's just not valuable for the magical purpose of sharing the reasons why we love artistic experiences with each other. During the writing of this, completely independently of my research and requests or input, since I have a PS5 and my girlfriend uses that to game because in case you missed it, I am totally a sub to this woman, she contacted our mutual best friend offering to give him her PlayStation 4 with Bloodborne, free of charge. Because he's a big fan of horror games, he just finished Hollow Knight on the Switch, and that just felt like the correct thing to do. This is the energy I want to see from FromSoft fans. I love to see passion in people that manage to access the same artistic experience and through it, create a community around sharing not just knowledge about secret loot and boss tactics or whatever, but also the experience itself and the joy of talking about it and what you find beautiful or fascinating or moving or gross or boring within it. And I want you to be a part of it. I'd love for you to be a part of it. It's so magical and gratifying to be a part of it. I hope that the little worm that I have in my brain and I forcefully laid in front of you here contagied you in some way. And if it hasn't, it's okay. FromSoftware games are hard. Thinking about art this way is a terribly nerdy habit that not everyone is going to love. The two things aren't even correlated, to be honest. You can love Dark Souls and not be a nerd. You can despise Sekiro and be subscribed to Mubi. You do you, buddy. But say you really want to get into a Dark Souls or a Bloodborne or a Sekiro. How do you do that? I wanted to follow my own preaching and leave some parting words for those who really want to enjoy and appreciate these games but for obvious reasons are having a hard time with it. I hope it's clear from what I've said so far that I find the snag you're in perfectly understandable, and while I can't relate completely, moments that tested my patience have occurred for sure. This is what I would tell to my younger self a dozen or so years ago, intimidated by the aura of ruthlessness of FromSoft's artistic production. Number 1. You don't need to get good. Remember Daniel Pennac? Look at your third right, the right not to finish a book. There's no shame in conceding that simply the game isn't for you. Not all art has to be made for everyone, in my opinion, and this doesn't mean that artistic experiences that are not for everyone are intrinsically better than more broadly made objects just because of their exclusivity. I would actually argue it's quite the contrary, but still, this art gets made and it's what we got. You don't need to put up with FromSoft's sense of good and satisfying gameplay. If this absolute trash fire of a video game doesn't appeal to you, get rid of it. Play something else. There's no gaming police that will come to your house claiming you're not a real gamer. Number 2. Don't be ashamed to look stuff up. Anytime you may find yourself stuck, remember that there are many poorly edited but very comprehensive wikis and subreddits, along with tons of YouTube videos dedicated to either gathering information about any and all nooks and crannies of all these worlds, or help less experienced players with builds, encounters, or direction. In particular, if any boss reveals to be too much of a challenge, know that it's probably cheesable, and that someone has already found the strategy to cheese it. A win is a win, doesn't matter how you get it. But if you really don't want to cheese a boss and wish to defeat it fair and square, number 3, patience is key. Honestly, it doesn't get much simpler than this. Do you remember all the training scenes in Karate Kid? These games are generally all about the experience of building up both your skill with the game by recognizing enemy patterns and attacks, and your character's power by finding new weapons, armor, spells, and upgrades. You'll definitely need a lot of patience. You'll need to pay attention to what is defeating you, try different approaches to boss fights, and with practice, you become better and better all the way to the end. It's a very interesting experience to start a FromSoft game, get through it, and after rolling credits, going back to the beginning and realize how tame and easy the challenges of the start of the game feels after you've gone through all the practicing and waxing and sanding and painting. And yes, this means dying. A ton. I want to be upfront because the repetition, the trial and error, the understanding of the environment you're exploring are at the core of the experience. At the end of the conversation with my brother, he ultimately told me that he hears me and my love for Sekiro, but he isn't really in the mood for a tough FromSoftware game right now, and to be honest, being a mindset to actually embark on a demanding video gaming experience is kind of required, at least for me and for him as well. And yes, sometimes the deaths will feel a tad unfair. It's okay. You just learned something. Now it's on you to make it so you don't find yourself in the same situation for you know the consequences. And you probably will make the same mistakes, because you're not perfect and that's fine. Soulsborne games do not require perfection to be enjoyable and to be completed. They require attention, dedication, passion, and patience. And they will reward you with a tremendous sense of joy. I really hope this thing moved you just a tiny bit to give these games a try. And if it hasn't, it's all good. We can play Deep Rock Galactic together if you want. Thanks for watching.